I'm with Maureen Grimshaw, who's at the Anglican International School here in Jerusalem. Now, Maureen, this hasn't always been a school, has it?
No, it hasn't. It was a property that was bought belonging to a society which still remains in Israel, in Jerusalem, and it was originally bought as a recreation centre. The land was meant to be a place where they could have people to come, to have a holiday, or recover from a sickness, or famous people that from overseas that were coming to visit. Even families and friends of the society would come and stay here and have holidays and come for rests and so on.
But then later on it became a hospital. How did the vision start there?
Well, the society called CMJ that started up the work in the old city, they built a hospital. The medical work was so popular and so many people used the property that they decided in the end they needed to build a bigger hospital. And so when this land was bought in 1863, it took some time. In 1897, eventually a hospital was built here. They found that they had to give up the other hospital, and also the idea was it was outside the old walls. It was also going to provide for many other people to be able to use it.
So what was the vision and the purpose of the hospital?
Well, there were missionaries to begin with. If you see at the front of the hospital, if you were here and you were looking up and you saw the tower at the front, you'd see it says, "I am the Lord that healeth thee." This is a scripture that's very famous and very perfect, very appropriate for us to use. They felt that it was one of the strongest influences on people's lives is if you're able to share about medicine and talk about the Lord.
Now, you say it was a Christian ministry and a missions work here. Was this really accepted by the Jews in the land?
Generally speaking, no. The poorer people were willing to listen, and they certainly needed the medical care. But there was an Orthodox community here. This was the first group of people that came back, of Jews that came back, were Orthodox. And they had to get help from overseas. The rabbis would send for money overseas and then help dish it out, give it out to the poor Jews. So they would put demands on them and tell them, if you have treatment, if you here, we will not bury you then when you die, we will not bury you in our cemeteries, and we'll stop and if you stay alive and you are healed and you do get better, we'll stop your funds. We will not help you and support you. So there was certainly a lot of pressure on people. They were told to cover their ears up if they heard the gospel, if they heard the Bible, but okay, take the medical care. It never really worked, though, because there was such a lot of need. This was a modern hospital in those days, and it was the first, both hospitals that were built were the first really organized medical care that was available in the area, so people knew to come here.
Was there a lot of sickness and disease around, like malaria and all them sort of illnesses?
Yes, there was. One of the main issues was that the fact that there was not clean water. The old cisterns, that took a long time to renew them and clean them up, and there was tremendous waste in old Jerusalem. The city was piled up with waste. People got sick with malaria. Malaria was quinine was the thing they handed out the most with the pharmacy. The pharmacy work was the earliest part of the medical work, in fact. And interesting enough, in the 1800s, the pharmacy was very popular. Of course, if people had wounds, it was difficult to clean, although by the time the second hospital came, it was built and ready. Florence Nightingale and the Crimean War had occurred, and people understood that you needed cleanliness. And this, of course, they found here, how to be clean, how to have, where the fresh air made a difference. Herbs, we grew herbs in the garden, and of course some antiseptics and so on were acceptable.
So the hospital became really valuable to the community in the area, really, in the end. Yes,
that's right. Even though they might have had a ban on people coming, in the end people gradually came back again because they knew that was where they would get the help that they were looking for.
Now, a hospital must have been quite expensive. How did they pay for the hospital?
Well, as usually with missionary work, they had a lot of people volunteering. In fact, we had one very famous person who was here and looked after. Unfortunately, he died, not because of the hospital care, and his name was Cadbury, the famous Cadbury family that make the chocolate. They were visiting Egypt, and apparently, while they were in Egypt, the Cadbury owner, he got an infectious disease, and they sent him here to our hospital, and and eventually he died. He did not recover because it was too severe. But his wife and family were so grateful at the care and the whole attitude of the place. They said, look, we want to contribute. Let us contribute. So, of course, we have a new ward, which then was the last ward to be built, the Cadbury ward. And they said, look, we want to also yearly provide some money to pay for a nurse. So, of course, what they had was a Cadbury nurse. Mm-hmm. And that went on for some time. Mm-hmm. There were other people that would donate large amounts of money, but in the original advertisement about the hospital, they would say anyone who would like to donate for a bed, they will, for £20, and a cot for £10, we would be happy to receive this. So there were small donations as well as large donations that eventually built up and made it possible to complete the hospital.
Now, there's been many famous people who've been linked to the hospital here. Who's been here?
Oh, well, we've had Mark Twain. We've had people from the Royal Engineers like Warren, Barclay, Wilson. They would come up here for a holiday or some kind of a break while they were here visiting, doing the archaeological works here. You know, that they made maps of Israel and discovered many areas. It was a very important part of British, part of not just a scientific need, but for religious reasons. So the Archaeological Society was begun here, and they would spend time on the property. They were actually based in Christchurch down in the old city. Then, of course, we've got, later on, we have other more famous people, such as Allenby, General Allenby, who was the one who actually won the victory at the Battle of Beersheba, which was the deciding battle for Jerusalem against the Turks. And finally, once he came to Jerusalem in December to take the keys from the mayor of Jerusalem, he and Lawrence of Arabia and other dignitaries from that time came up to the school where General Shea was based, and they had a lunch, and which Francois Picot suggested to Allenby that the French take back Israel. They would be now the administrators, and of course it was a verbal fight, but Allenby won. Allenby was known as a very strong man verbally as well as good with battles.
And you've had royalty here as well?
Yes, we had Queen Victoria's grandson came to visit, and he stood up on what was at the time called Godfrey's Heights, which is up here, and there were some famous trees. There was a photo taken of him leaning against the tree, looking across at the view.
Now, the building, the property was purchased in 1863. It was the first plot outside the city wall?
It was the first large plot, the first plot that was, enclosed. It had it has a lot of systems. They found a lot of artifacts. And it became a safe place for people to come. They'd say, we want to go to a clean, safe place. And they would make their way across here to stay for a holiday or to visit.
Yeah, and of course the Turks came here in 1914. What were they doing here?
Well, we know the Turks and the Germans were planning to drive the British out of Israel and certainly out of Jerusalem. And that was the beginning of the First World War. And of course they did make their way up here, the Turks, and they took over the hospital. They used it as an infectious center and also for their wounded soldiers. And when they left, of course, the place was completely cleaned out of any equipment that we had, and in a shocking condition, but it was in the end renovated.
And of course, in 1917, things changed there because the British took over the land. So how did that change for the school, and what did the British do in the school?
Although we had a hospital here, there is another part of the ministry which did also come onto the property, and that was schooling. Girls and boys' schools. I won't go into the details, it's quite complex, but there was always a school, and the ministry's always had a school associated with it, boarding schools and day schools. And when, during the First World War, until the Turks closed the girls' school, this was so. Now, once the Turks left, the British had a victory in the First World War. The Turks were driven out, and the British came in, used this also as an administrative centre, but also the hospital, the schools continued, and the hospital continued. So it was quite a busy centre for those three areas.
Now, was terrorism rife in those days in the area?
It was not so. There was a certain amount of terrorism in Jerusalem, but it became much more rife in 1948 when the British left. And of course the land was, different parts of the land were up for grabs. and Israel, the Israelis came here. We had some terror attacks here on the walls and hitting parts of the hospital building, doing a lot of damage. And one of the most significant wars was when the Israelis came in and took one of the schools. This is how they took the property, and they put a flag on which became the first flag in Israel. And this is why in Israel, in Hebrew, it's called the Beit Degel, was called the House of the Flag. The first Israeli flag that was put up in Jerusalem, certainly, was the one on our school property.
So in 1948, Israel existed as a nation. How did that affect the hospital here?
Well, the hospital at that time wasn't working very well because of the Arab uprisings, and in fact, Hadassah, which was originally, the original hospital had been built. Of course, after we started building hospitals, there were a number of hospitals, and the one they had built was a crossover in Harat Sofim. They couldn't reach their patients, and people couldn't get across. So, and with our hospital, we certainly couldn't get over to the old and the new city also. So there was various problems with transport because of the Arab uprisings. CMJ decided that they would lend this hospital to Hadassah, and the patients were transported over from the French side over to our hospital, and it became Hadassah Hospital. We were not the only ones that helped. There were two other places that helped, but we were called what we would say Hadassah Aleph, the first. They had a maternity unit here, an X-ray unit, and this remained under part of this building. Then was part of the compound was actually Hadassah Hospital for some 14 years. CMJ kept some of the buildings, and of course we always had schools here. And then by the time Hadassah Hospital had been built in Haim Kerem, we were able to take back our property, and Hadassah moved. We couldn't remain as a hospital really at this time at all. So eventually this brought us up to 67, around 62, and then of course we got. Then 5 years later was 67, the War of Independence.
Now, I guess when it was still 1948, the old city of Jerusalem was actually in Jordan, and they used to fire their guns across over into Israel. Did that affect the hospital here?
Yes, it did. There were not a lot of attacks here, but we have had experiences where there were the walls were damaged, and a certain part of the building inside was damaged, and there was there was danger. But generally speaking, it was fairly safe because we had underneath we have very good cellars. We have some very large rooms underneath. The foundations are strong, so these could be used as a safety measure when bombs and what have you were flying above.
So how did everything change with the War of Independence?
Once the War of Independence came, this was up to Israel. All the properties became part of Israeli land. And so we were dependent on what Israel would say, and they were so grateful, and they said that they were very happy that what we had done, and felt that they didn't want to throw the mission away and throw us out, but we couldn't really be part of the schools. They had their own school system, and they suggested that perhaps we could be a school that would serve independently as an international school, seeing, especially for people that come from overseas to live here. They're diplomats. There are workers coming to Israel. There are Christians, many Christians still. Of course, there's Christian missions here, Christian pilgrims coming. Israel's always been a place for pilgrimages, and the Israelis love that and welcome it. So there's places that this served as a great, as an educational centre for the children of these people.
And that's what the place is today. It's a school for international people today.
That's right. It's an international school today. We have some Israelis. We have people from all over the world, from different organizations, some Christians, some not Christians. And as has always been, we never refused, even from the early days, in all of the mission, anyone that was not Jewish. So originally it was a mission to the Jews. We will accept Muslims, people to come to our school. But of course we always mention that it is, and we believe and know that it's important to say that this is a Christian school. And so they will abide by our rules, our Christian concepts and rules in the day-to-day activities.
Now, what are you doing here in the school?
Yes, I'm a nurse. I'm the nurse here in the school, and I feel quite rather privileged to be a nurse here because it's had such a long history of medicine and also schooling, so the two things come together for me. It's important in this particular school, I believe, because it's an international school, and people come for short periods. Many children are here only for 2 years, 1 year, maybe sometimes even 6 months, and it's quite traumatic for the students. They come and go, they leave friends, they have to change programs, they have to leave teachers that they've become used to. And so I feel I play quite an important role in supporting them and helping them. They come to me, of course, for everyday bumps and lumps and fevers and so on, but I see myself as a support for these children.
And what's your prayer for the children and the youth here in the school and for the school in general?
My prayer is that they'll enjoy the school. They'll do as well as they possibly can, and they'll learn something about the amazing historic origins and purposes of Israel. We know God hasn't finished with Israel. We know that it lives in the center of a very explosive, very volatile situation. But we know that God has got everything in control. And I always believe that I want them to see and feel God's love, but I also hope that as they learn about Israel, they'll understand that Jewish people are important to the Lord, as well as, of course, all the other nationalities that are here.
Okay, Maureen, thank you very much.
Thank you.